The letter arrived on a morning that smelled of rain and old paper. Professor Nathaniel Carter noticed it the moment he unlocked the archive room of the Midwestern Historical Society. The building was quiet at that early hour. Only the distant ticking of a hallway clock and the low rumble of thunder outside disturbed the silence. The envelope lay alone on his wooden desk. It had not been there the night before. Nathaniel frowned and closed the door behind him. The room was dim, lit only by the tall windows that filtered pale grey light through sheets of rain. Dust floated lazily in the air, glowing faintly like tiny ghosts. He removed his damp coat and approached the desk. The envelope was thick, yellowed, and sealed with dark red wax. When he touched it, the paper felt brittle, rough like dried leaves. It carried a faint smell of smoke and something older, like soil turned by a shovel. Nathaniel turned it over. His breath caught. The address had been written in elegant ink handwriting. Professor Nathaniel Carter, Department of Historical Records, Midwestern Historical Society. But what made his heart beat faster was the date stamped in the corner. October 18th, 1891. Nathaniel ran a finger across the ink. It was dry and cracked with age. "That's impossible," he murmured. The room felt colder suddenly. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows like impatient fingers. Nathaniel sat down slowly and examined the wax seal. It carried a strange symbol pressed deep into the red surface, a crooked tree surrounded by a circle of tiny marks. He had seen that symbol before, somewhere. But where? He slipped a letter opener beneath the wax and broke the seal. The sharp crack echoed loudly in the quiet room. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The smell that rose from it was stronger now, old parchment mixed with the faint scent of burning wood. Nathaniel unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded, but was still readable. He began to read. "If this letter has reached you, then the town has been forgotten." Nathaniel blinked. Town, Hollow Creek, must remain buried. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, making Nathaniel glance over his shoulder. The long aisles of shelves behind him stood silent, filled with thousands of dusty records. He turned back to the letter. What happened there must never be uncovered. If you value your life, burn this letter and forget the name Hollow Creek. Nathaniel felt a strange chill run across his skin. His fingertips had grown cold. He continued reading. But if curiosity is stronger than fear, travel to the Ozark Mountains. Search the ruins near the old mining road. There you will find the truth about the night the town died. Nathaniel stopped. The letter ended there. No signature, no explanation, just silence. For several long seconds he listened to the room around him. The clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Rain drummed harder against the windows. He folded the letter slowly. Hollow Creek, he whispered. The name stirred something faint in his memory. A rumor, perhaps, a forgotten case, a story buried somewhere in the archives behind him. Nathaniel stood and walked toward the towering shelves. Dust coated the spines of countless books and records. His fingers moved across them until he reached the regional history section. He began searching. Minutes passed. Finally, he found a thin, cracked ledger near the bottom shelf. When he opened it, the musty smell of age rose sharply, dry and bitter on his tongue. His eyes scanned the pages. Then he froze. There it was. Hollow Creek, Arkansas. Population 312. Nathaniel turned the page. The next entry made his stomach tighten. Status: abandoned. October 17th, 1891. The same date as the letter. But below the entry, someone had scribbled a single sentence in jagged ink. No survey, Ivers were ever found. Nathaniel slowly closed the ledger. Behind him, somewhere deep in the silent archive, a floorboard creaked. He turned around sharply. But the room was empty. Or at least, it looked empty. Nathaniel swallowed. because suddenly he had the strange feeling that someone else in the archive already knew about Hollow Creek. And they did not want him reading that letter. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Chapter 2. Footsteps in the Dust. The archive was not supposed to make sounds. Professor Nathaniel Carter stood frozen beside the tall shelves, the old ledger still in his hands. The floorboard creak had been soft, but in the quiet building it sounded as loud as a gunshot. He listened. The air in the archive felt heavy, thick with the dusty smell of paper and leather bindings. Rain continued tapping against the windows, and somewhere in the hallway the clock ticked steadily. Tick, tick, tick. Nathaniel slowly set the ledger back onto the shelf. His fingers brushed the cracked spine, leaving a faint trail through the dust. "Hello?" he called. His voice echoed between the narrow rows of shelves. No answer. He stepped carefully between the aisles. The wooden floor felt cool beneath his shoes, and each step produced a faint groan from the old boards. The archive stretched in long rows filled with documents dating back 2 centuries. Most days the room comforted Nathaniel. It smelled of ink, parchment, and time itself. But this morning felt different. The shadows between the shelves looked deeper than usual. He reached the end of one aisle and turned the corner. Nothing. Just more towering shelves and dim grey light spilling through the windows. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "You're imagining things," he muttered. Still, the back of his neck prickled as though someone were watching him. He walked back toward his desk, the folded letter resting in his coat pocket. He could feel the paper there, stiff and dry, like a small secret pressing against his chest. When he reached the desk, he noticed something that made him stop again. The front door of the archive building was slightly open. Nathaniel frowned. He clearly remembered locking it when he arrived. A thin ribbon of cold air drifted through the doorway, carrying the scent of wet earth and rain. It bruised, shed against his face like a warning. He approached slowly. Outside, the street was empty. Rain fell steadily onto the pavement, creating small silver ripples in puddles. A horse carriage rattled somewhere far down the road, its wheels splashing through water. But no one stood near the door. Nathaniel stepped closer and touched the brass handle. Cold. Very cold. "Strange," he murmured. Just then something caught his eye. On the floor beside the door lay a small patch of muddy footprints. Nathaniel crouched. The prints were fresh. Dark brown mud marked the wooden floorboards, each step clearly visible. Whoever had entered the building had come in from the rain, but the footprints did not lead outside. They led deeper into the archive. Nathaniel followed them with his eyes. They passed his desk, then continued toward the very shelf where he had just discovered the ledger about Hollow Creek. His stomach tightened. Someone had been standing there, watching him read. A faint chill crawled across his skin. Nathaniel stood slowly and turned toward the shelves again. The archive now seemed far larger than before. The aisles stretched into shadow, silent and unmoving. He took a careful step forward. The air smelled faintly different now. Not just dust and paper. Something else. Something bitter. Smoke. Nathaniel's eyes widened. He reached into his coat and pulled out the mysterious letter again. The parchment still carried that faint scent of burning wood. His mind raced. The letter had warned him to burn it, to forget the name Hollow Creek. And now someone had entered the archive, quietly, secretly, and watched him discover the town's record. Nathaniel looked once more at the muddy footprints. Then he noticed something even more unsettling. They stopped suddenly in the middle of the aisle, as if the person who made them had simply vanished. Nathaniel felt his heartbeat quicken, because if the footprints ended there, then whoever had been watching him might still be inside the archive, standing somewhere in the shadows, watching him right now. Chapter 3. The Photograph Without Faces. Nathaniel Carter did not move for several seconds. The muddy footprints ended in the center of the aisle, dark against the wooden floor, their edges slowly drying in the cool air of the archive. Beyond them there was nothing, no more prints, no sign of where the stranger had gone. Yet the feeling of being watched had only grown stronger. Nathaniel's throat felt dry. "Is someone there?" he asked quietly. His voice sounded small inside the towering room. Only the ticking clock answered. Tick, tick, tick. He forced himself to step closer to the footprints. The air carried a faint, bitter smell now, like damp ashes stirred by wind. It lingered at the back of his throat, unpleasant and sharp. Nathaniel crouched again. The mud was thick and dark, clinging to the grooves between the wooden boards. Whoever had entered the building must have walked through deep earth somewhere outside. But the strange part was not the mud. It was the shape. The prints were narrow and long, with deep pressure at the heel, as though the person had been leaning forward while walking, almost creeping. Nathaniel straightened slowly. His gaze lifted toward the shelf beside him. This was the exact place where he had found the Hollow Creek ledger. Something else now rested on the shelf that had not been there before. A photograph. Nathaniel frowned. He reached out and picked it up. The paper felt thick and stiff, its surface slightly rough beneath his fingers. Old photographs often carried a faint metallic smell, but this one smelled strongly of smoke, just like the letter. He held it beneath the window light. The image slowly revealed itself. It showed a small town street surrounded by steep forested hills. Wooden buildings lined the road, their rooftops crooked and weathered. A faded wooden sign hung above a general store. Nathaniel leers, and closer. The sign read, Hollow Creek Mercantile. His pulse quickened. In the photograph, people stood gathered in the street, dozens of them, men in suspenders and hats, women in long dresses, children standing barefoot in the dirt road. The town looked peaceful, almost ordinary, but something about the picture felt wrong. Nathaniel squinted. Then his breath caught. None of the people had faces. The shapes of their bodies were clear, their clothing visible, their postures frozen in time. But where their faces should have been, there was only pale blur. Like fog. Nathaniel felt a cold shiver run down his back. "How is that possible?" he whispered. He turned the photograph over. Someone had written a message on the back in faded ink. The handwriting looked hurried, almost frantic. Nathaniel read the words slowly. Taken 2 hours before the fire. His stomach tightened. Fire. The smell in the archive suddenly seemed stronger again. Burned wood. Ash. Nathaniel glanced back at the photograph. Something else now caught his attention. In the background of the image stood a small wooden church at the edge of town. Its steeple leaned slightly to one side, casting a thin shadow across the dirt road. The church door was open, and inside the darkness of the doorway, there was a single figure. Unlike the others in the photo, this figure had a face. Nathaniel leaned closer to the window, bringing the image nearer to the light. The man in the doorway stared directly at the camera. His eyes were dark, his expression calm, almost smiling. Nathaniel's blood turned cold. Because he recognized the man. It was the exact same crooked tree symbol from the letter, carved into the church door behind him. Nathaniel's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the photograph. The letter had warned him to forget Hollow Creek. Someone had been inside the archive just moments ago, and now a photograph had appeared that proved something terrible had happened to the town. Nathaniel looked again toward the silent rows of shelves. The room suddenly felt smaller, more confined. Because if someone had placed that photograph there, then they had been standing close enough to watch him, close enough to know he was investigating Hollow Creek, and perhaps close enough to hear every word he had spoken. Nathaniel slowly turned the photograph over again. Only now did he notice one final line written beneath the first message. 3 chilling words. He survived the fire. Nathaniel felt his heart pound, because if someone survived Hollow Creek, then that man in the church doorway might still be alive. Disclaimer: this story is purely fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is entirely coincidental. Chapter 4: The Man Who Should Be Dead. Nathaniel Carter stood motionless beneath the dim window light, the photograph trembling slightly between his fingers. Rain continued to fall outside, its soft drumming against the glass filling the archive with a steady rhythm. The air inside smelled thicker now: dust, old paper, and that lingering scent of burnt wood that clung stubbornly to the photograph. He studied the man standing in the church doorway again. The image was faded, scratched by time, yet the figure remained disturbingly clear compared to the blurred townspeople around him. His coat was dark and long, almost priest-like. One hand rested against the wooden frame of the church door, and behind him, carved deeply into the wood, was the crooked tree symbol. Nathaniel felt the rough edge of the photograph beneath his thumb. "Who are you?" he murmured. The man's expression seemed almost calm, too calm for someone standing in a town that, according to the ledger, would soon vanish. Nathaniel turned the photograph over again and read the final line once more. He survived the fire. A quiet unease settled into his chest. If that statement were true, then someone from Hollow Creek had escaped whatever disaster destroyed the town in 1891. But that raised another question. Why had every official record claimed there were no survivors? Nathaniel returned to the ledger shelf and pulled the book down again. Dust puffed into the air as he opened it, carrying the dry taste of age across his tongue. He flipped through the fragile pages. Most entries in the book were brief summaries: population numbers, census changes, notes about floods or railroad expansions. But Hollow Creek had only 2 entries. The first described the town's population, 312 residents. The second read simply, "Abandoned, October 17, 1891. Then came the strange scribbled line beneath it: "No SUs. Survivors were ever found." Nathaniel ran his fingers across the ink. It had been written later than the original entry. The strokes were uneven, almost angry. Someone had added it after the fact. He leaned back slowly in his chair. The archive felt strangely quiet again. Too quiet. Then Nathaniel noticed something else tucked inside the ledger. A thin folded page had been slipped between the records. He carefully pulled it free. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age. The headline read, "Mysterious Fire Destroys Ozark Mining Town." Nathaniel leaned closer, the paper crackling softly beneath his fingers. The article described a massive fire that had reportedly swept through Hollow Creek in the early hours of October 17, 1891. According to the report, the flames had spread so quickly that the entire town was reduced to ashes by morning. Nathaniel could almost imagine it. The roar of fire, the smell of burning timber, smoke choking the narrow valley streets. But something about the article felt wrong. He read the final paragraph again. Authorities arriving 2 days later found the town completely deserted. No bodies were discovered among the ruins. Nathaniel blinked. No bodies. Not a single one. His mind raced. A fire strong enough to destroy an entire town should have left something behind: bones, personal belongings, signs of panic. But the article claimed the place had simply been empty, as though every resident had vanished before the flames arrived. Nathaniel leaned back slowly. A cold realization crept into his thoughts. If the photograph was correct, someone had taken it 2 hours before the fire began, which meant the townspeople were still there, standing calmly in the street. Then suddenly, within 2 hours, the town burned and every single person disappeared, except one. Nathaniel glanced again at the photograph of the man in the church doorway. The man who survived. The man with the crooked tree symbol behind him. Just then, a sharp knock echoed through the archive door. Nathaniel jumped. The sound was sudden and loud, breaking the heavy silence of the room. Another knock followed. Slow. Deliberate. Nathaniel looked toward the entrance. A shadow moved faintly beneath the doorframe. Someone was standing outside, waiting. Chapter 5. The Visitor in the Rain. The knock came again. Slow, heavy. Nathaniel Carter stared at the door across the archive room. The sound echoed faintly between the tall shelves like a warning. For a moment he considered ignoring it, but whoever stood outside seemed patient. Another knock followed, 3 firm taps against the wood. Rain hissed softly against the windows, and the smell of wet pavement drifted through the slightly open doorway. Somewhere far down the street, a carriage wheel splashed through a puddle. Nathaniel slipped the photograph and newspaper clipping into the ledger and closed it carefully. Then he walked toward the door. The wooden floor creaked beneath his steps. Each sound seemed too loud in the quiet building. When he reached the door, he paused. A tall shadow stretched across the glass panel. Nathaniel swallowed. "Who is it?" he asked. A deep voice answered from the other side. "Just a traveler looking to stay dry." The voice sounded calm, friendly even. But something about the tone made Nathaniel uneasy. He slowly opened the door. Cold, rain-soaked air rushed into the archive, bringing with it the earthy smell of mud and wet leaves. A man stood on the steps. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat soaked through with rain. Water dripped steadily from the brim of his hat. Nathaniel immediately noticed the man's eyes. They were sharp and observant, moving quickly across the room behind Nathaniel before settling back on his face. "Sorry to bother you," the man said. "Storm caught me halfway down the street." Nathaniel stepped aside. "Come in." The man removed his hat as he entered. His boots left faint muddy marks on the floorboards. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to the footprints. They looked almost identical to the ones he had found earlier. A cold shiver crept along his spine. The man glanced around, the archive with quiet interest. "Quite a place," he said. "Smells like history." Nathaniel gave a thin smile. "Old paper tends to do that." The man wiped rainwater from his beard. His face looked weathered, the skin roughened by wind and travel. "How can I help you?" Nathaniel asked. The man hesitated for a moment. Then he said something that made Nathaniel's pulse quicken. "I'm looking for information about an old town." Nathaniel tried to keep his voice steady. "Which town?" The man studied him carefully before answering. "Hollow Creek." The name hung in the air like a sudden chill. Nathaniel forced himself not to react. "Hollow Creek," he repeated. "I'm not sure I've heard of it." The man smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "That's strange," he said. "Most historians would." Nathaniel felt the tension in the room tighten. Rainwater dripped steadily from the man's coat onto the wooden floor. Drip, drip, drip. The man slowly stepped closer to the desk. Nathaniel noticed something in his hand. A photograph. His stomach twisted. It was the exact same photograph Nathaniel had just discovered. The town of Hollow Creek, the blurred townspeople, and the man standing in the church doorway. The visitor placed the photograph gently on the desk. "I believe," the stranger said quietly, "you found this earlier today." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten. "How did you—" The man raised a hand, stopping him. His expression darkened slightly. "Before we go any further," he said, "I need to ask you one important question." The room seemed to grow colder. Nathaniel could hear the rain, the ticking clock, even the faint rustle of paper from the shelves behind him. The stranger leaned forward slightly and asked the question in a calm, steady voice. "Professor Carter, do you know what really happened to the people of Hollow Creek?" Nathaniel opened his mouth to answer, but the stranger spoke again before he could. "Because if you don't," the man said softly, "then you're already in far more danger than you realize."
Did you know in the Ozark region of the United States, extinct or ghost towns are a part of real history? Places that once existed but were completely abandoned or destroyed, leaving only stories and ruins behind. One documented example is Melva, Missouri, a small railroad community in the Ozark Hills. In March 1920, a powerful tornado struck Melva, killing 11 people and leveling virtually every building there. Within a year, Melva had disappeared so thoroughly from the landscape that map makers removed it from official Missouri maps. Today, only scattered timbers and foundations occasionally emerge from the earth after heavy rains, marking where the town once stood. Another real ghost town in Arkansas is Graysonia, once a thriving timber boomtown with over 1,000 residents. When the timber industry dried up in the early 20th century, residents left in droves. By 1951, the last inhabitant departed, and what was once a bustling town became silent foundations and empty land reclaimed by nature. These abandoned places, destroyed by natural disaster or economic collapse, remind us that many towns, once full of life, can vanish from memory and maps, leaving behind only traces that fuel mystery and imagination.
Chapter 6. Secrets in the Shadows. The visitor's words hung in the archive like a dark fog. Nathaniel Carter felt the room grow heavier, as if the very air pressed against his chest. The rain outside intensified, hammering the windows with sudden urgency, mixing with the smell of wet earth and soot. Nathaniel's hands rested on the desk, fingers brushing the photograph once more. The image of Hollow Creek burned itself into his mind, the faceless townspeople, the crooked tree symbol, and the man in the church doorway. Alive, watching, knowing. Nathaniel began, but the visitor raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't speak yet," he said, his voice low but firm. "Some things are better understood before words are wasted." The stranger's eyes flicked toward the tall shelves lining the archive. "You've been poking where you shouldn't." Nathaniel swallowed hard, his pulse pounding in his ears. "I found a ledger, a photograph, a letter. Someone warned me." The man nodded, stepping closer. Mud from his boots left tiny splatters on the wooden floor. "Warnings rarely stop the curious, Professor. That is why I came." Nathaniel shivered. "Who are you?" The stranger's face was partly shadowed by the brim of his damp hat, but his eyes glimmered with an unsettling intensity. "Call me an interested party," he said. "I've been tracking Hollow Creek for decades. Its story, its disappearance, has layers most could never imagine." The phrase made Nathaniel lean forward. "You mean the fire?" The visitor's lips tightened. "The fire was only the beginning. Hollow Creek was never meant to vanish so quietly. Its people, its secrets, did not perish as the record suggests." Nathaniel felt a chill run through him. Smoke and ash seemed to fill the room, faintly tickling his nostrils. He could almost taste it, acrid and metallic. He glanced at the photograph again, tracing the blues, red faces with his finger. How could everyone disappear?" he whispered. The man lowered his voice. "Because some things are not meant to be found. Some truths are dangerous." Nathaniel's mind raced. He thought of the letter's warning. If curiosity is stronger than fear, travel to the Ozark Mountains. He looked up sharply. "Are you saying someone survived?" The stranger nodded slowly. "Yes, one man, and he carries the mark." He pointed toward the photograph. "The symbol, the crooked tree. You've seen it, haven't you? On the church door." Nathaniel's stomach tightened. Every nerve in his body screamed caution. "Then, he's alive?" The man's eyes held something dark, almost reverent. "Alive, yes. But that does not mean safe. Hollow Creek's secret is not merely historical. It is alive, in a way you cannot yet imagine." A sudden gust rattled the windows, shaking the old panes and sending a cold draft across the room. Nathaniel could hear the faint drip of water from the stranger's coat onto the floor. Drip, drip, drip. The man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Professor, you must understand. Whoever knows too much about Hollow Creek becomes part of the story, whether they like it or not." Nathaniel swallowed, a metallic taste rising in his mouth. The air felt thicker now, heavy with the scent of damp paper, mud, and something faintly metallic, blood or something older. He looked at the visitor, realizing the man's calm exterior masked something far more dangerous. His gaze flicked to the photograph again. "And you're here," Nathaniel said slowly, "to make sure I don't." The stranger smiled faintly, but there was no warmth, only the shadow of intent behind it. "No, Professor," he said softly. "I'm here to see if you survive long enough to understand the truth, because the man in Hollow Creek is not the only one who watches." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the archive, a falling shelf or a heavy object striking the floor. Dust rose into the air, and the metallic tang of something new, something sharp, hit Nathaniel's nose. The stranger's eyes flicked toward the sound. "They're already here," he said. Nathaniel froze. His ears picked up the faintest scuffle of movement between the shadows of the shelves. Someone, or something, was in the archive, watching, waiting. And Nathaniel realized with a sick certainty that Hollow Creek's secrets had just reached out to him, in the flesh. Chapter 7. Whispers among the shelves. The crash had set Nathaniel Carter's nerves alight. His heart thudded violently, echoing in the dim archive as he strained to hear over the pounding rain outside. The metallic tang in the air made his stomach twist, a mix of fear and anticipation he could not shake. The visitor, tall, soaked, and unreadable, did not move at first. He simply scanned the room with sharp, calculating eyes. Then, with a subtle gesture, he pointed toward the narrow aisle between the shelves. Nathaniel followed his gaze. The shadows seemed darker there, almost alive, shifting with the rhythm of his own ragged breathing. He could smell the faint scent of damp earth and something else, faint but unmistakable. Iron. Blood, perhaps, or the remnants of some violence long buried. A whisper brushed against his ear. He spun. Nothing. Just the rows of shelves, their towers of brittle ledgers and crumbling records. Yet the whisper had come from somewhere between the books, a hiss of words he couldn't make out. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice barely above the rain. The visitor's eyes flicked to him, calm but intent. "Yes. Hollow Creek speaks in more ways than one. Its echoes never die, and neither do its witnesses." Nathaniel's stomach tightened. He thought of the photograph, faceless townspeople, the man in the church doorway. He had known something was wrong with Hollow Creek, but now the very air seemed to pulse with a warning. Another soft whisper came, this time from deeper in the aisle. Words in a voice too thin and delicate to be fully human. "Leave, before it's too late." Nathaniel's fingers trembled. He could feel the rough edges of the ledger pressing against his palm, the faint taste of smoke still lingering on his tongue. The whisper repeated, closer now, almost as if circling him. "Leave Hollow Creek, or join them." "Who's there?" he demanded, trying to project authority. His voice cracked. No answer, only the shifting shadows between the towering shelves. The visitor's gaze followed the movement. "They're testing you," he said quietly. "The town wants to see if you're worth its secrets." Nathaniel shivered. A cold draft swept through the aisle, carrying with it a sharper metallic scent. He pressed a hand against the wall for balance. The wood felt unnervingly warm under his palm, as if something unseen had just brushed against it. Suddenly, the whisper ceased. The archive returned to near silence. Only the rain and the ticking clock filled the room. Nathaniel took a careful step forward. His boots echoed in the empty aisles. He could taste the acrid scent of something burning, perhaps old paper or something darker. Then, without warning, a ledger fell from a high shelf 2 aisles over, slamming to the floor with a deafening crack. The sound reverberated through the room, and a cloud of dust rose, filling Nathaniel's nostrils and making him cough. When the dust settled, he saw it. A figure, a shadow, taller than a man, standing just beyond the edge of the falling ledger. Its shape was distorted, elongated by the flickering light from the rain-soaked windows. The visitor stiffened, his jaw tight. Nathaniel could not make out the face, if it had one, but the figure seemed familiar. The way it moved, the way it waited, it felt like the image from the photograph. The man in the church doorway, and now, alive. The shadow tilted its head slowly, as if acknowledging him. Then a faint, chilling smile seemed to stretch across its invisible face. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. The visitor whispered under his breath, "It begins." The figure took a step forward, and the archive, so long a place of silence and history, suddenly felt like a tomb. Chapter 8. The Ledger of Lost Names. Nathaniel Carter felt the air tighten around him, thick and choking. The shadow beyond the fallen ledger remained still, yet its presence pressed on him like a physical weight. The visitor beside him had gone quiet, his sharp eyes fixed on the figure. Rain drummed steadily against the windows, a chaotic rhythm that mingled with the distant tick of the old clock. The scent of wet earth and iron, stronger now, clung to Nathaniel's senses, leaving a metallic tang in his mouth. Nathaniel began, but the visitor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Quiet," the man said. "Observe first. The town's echoes are patient, but not forgiving." Nathaniel's gaze shifted. The shadow slowly moved aside, revealing a section of shelves he had not noticed before. Dust thickened the air here, settling in layers over brittle ledgers and forgotten records. One book in particular seemed to draw the eye, bound in cracked black leather and tied with a thin, fraying cord. He approached it cautiously, every step creaking beneath his boots. The visitor followed silently. The ledger seemed almost alive beneath Nathaniel's fingers. As he untied the cord, the smell of smoke and ash hit him stronger, making his eyes water. He opened it carefully. The pages were brittle, their edges curled like the wings of dead moths. Yet the ink was clear, black and unyielding against the yellowed paper. Each page bore a list of names, hundreds of them. Nathaniel scanned quickly, his stomach tightening with dread. The names were mostly familiar, residents of Hollow Creek, men, women, children, but beside each name a single word was written: taken, gone, lost. And then, suddenly, he froze. One entry was different. Survived. He waits. His pulse surged. The handwriting matched the ink on the photograph, the same jagged, hurried strokes. The visitor's eyes were on the ledger. "Oh, you see," he whispered. "The town remembers." Nathaniel flipped through more pages. The list stretched further than he could fathom, names continuing without end. Yet every name carried the same ominous note: vanished, missing, departed. And every now and then, the word survived appeared. Always one name per page. A gust of wind rattled the windows, scattering the dust across the floor and carrying a faint whisper through the shelves. Nathaniel could barely make it out, a voice like dry leaves brushing together. "Find him. Before he finds you." He looked up sharply. The shadow had moved closer again, silent as smoke. He could feel its gaze piercing him. The visitor stepped forward, placing a hand on the ledger. "This is the ledger of lost names," he said, voice low and reverent. "Every person from Hollow Creek, every soul touched by the town's fire. And yet, not every soul was claimed. Some linger, hidden, waiting." Nathaniel swallowed, the metallic taste of fear coating his tongue. "And the man in the photograph, he's the last." The visitor shook his head slowly. "He is the first, and the only one who carries the mark of survival." Nathaniel's fingers trembled as he traced the inked word beside the name: survived. A sudden creak echoed behind them. The shelves shuddered as if the building itself had sighed. Dust swirled around their feet, and the shadow shifted again, moving closer. Nathaniel's heart raced. The ledger trembled in his hands. He could feel a pulse beneath the pages, a strange vibration that seemed to emanate from the words themselves. The visitor leaned in and whispered, "The moment you touch Hollow Creek's secrets, you join the story. The question now is, Will you survive it? From the darkness between the shelves, a soft, deliberate sound emerged. Footsteps, slow, measured, not human. Nathaniel's breath caught. He looked at the visitor. Did they follow us from Hollow Creek? He whispered. The visitor's eyes hardened. Yes, and they've been waiting for someone foolish enough to read the ledger. The footsteps grew louder. The air felt charged, like a storm about to break. Nathaniel's hands clenched the edges of the book. His pulse throbbed in his ears. Because from somewhere deep in the shadowed aisles, something was coming for them. Chapter 9. The Hallway of Eyes. Nathaniel Carter's heart thundered as the soft, deliberate footsteps echoed through the shadowed archive. Each step seemed impossibly close and yet impossible to locate. The metallic tang of iron grew stronger, filling his mouth with a bitter, coppery taste. The visitor remained calm, though his eyes scanned the shelves with the precision of a predator. Stay close, he whispered. Do not panic. Hollow Creek's presence. It thrives on fear. Nathaniel gripped the ledger of lost names tightly. The pages crackled beneath his fingers. Every name, every mark, seemed to vibrate faintly, like a whisper brushing against the edge of his mind. The footsteps stopped suddenly. Silence. Thick. Unbearable. Nathaniel could feel the pressure of the unknown pressing in from the shadows, surrounding them on all sides. Then he noticed something strange. Along the back wall, above a row of towering shelves, tiny glimmers of light appeared, like candle flames trapped behind glass. He squinted. They weren't lights. They were eyes. Hundreds of them. Small, round, glowing, and unblinking. They peeked from between the books, from the cracks in the shelves, and from darkened corners of the archive. Some were bright amber, others shimmered pale grey. Nathaniel's stomach churned. Eyes? He whispered. The visitor's jaw tightened. The town watches. Nathaniel stepped back, his boots slipping slightly on the dust-covered floor. The eyes followed every motion, every subtle movement of his hands. The air was thick with an acrid metallic scent, and a low humming filled his ears, almost like a heartbeat, but not his own. From between the aisles, the shadow began to shift, elongating unnaturally. It moved closer, silent, gliding rather than walking, its presence warping the air around it. Nathaniel's fingers clenched the ledger. He could feel a faint heat radiating from it, as if the ink itself were alive. The visitor leaned toward him, voice low and urgent. They are drawn to knowledge, to curiosity, to anyone who dares uncover Hollow Creek's story. A low whisper floated from the darkness, chilling him to the bone. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have come. Nathaniel's eyes darted between the ledger, the visitor, and the glowing eyes. The whisper repeated, more insistent now, echoing faintly across the shelves. The survivor must not be found. His hands trembled. He could almost taste smoke and ash on his tongue again. The sensation of cold dread crawled up his spine. Suddenly, the shadow lunged forward. Nathaniel stumbled back, the ledger almost slipping from his grasp. He stumbled into a shelf, knocking down a stack of ledgers, the papers fluttering like trapped birds. The eyes multiplied, blinking in the corners of his vision. Each seemed to burn into him, as if reading his thoughts, judging his every decision. The visitor stepped between him and the shadow, his coat brushing the floor. You must leave, he said, voice sharp now, commanding. You cannot face it unprepared. Hollow Creek does not forgive the curious. Nathaniel shook his head, panic rising. I need to know. Who is the survivor? What happened to the town? The shadow paused, almost as if considering him. Then, without warning, the ledger in Nathaniel's hands suddenly burned hot, as if the ink had ignited. He yelped and dropped it. Pages smoked, curling slightly at the edges. From the darkness, the whisper grew louder, filling the room. He sees you. He's coming. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. The visitor grabbed his arm. We have no time, he said. If the survivor knows you found the ledger. A faint, distorted sound, half laughter, half growl, rose from between the shelves. Something was moving toward them, faster. And Nathaniel knew with a sick certainty that Hollow Creek's last living witness had finally sensed them. Chapter 10. The Map of Forgotten Roads. Nathaniel Carter's lungs burned as he stepped back from the shadow, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of those unblinking eyes scattered among the shelves. Rain drummed relentlessly against the windows, hammering a chaotic rhythm that seemed almost to mirror his own racing heartbeat. The visitor's hand tightened on Nathaniel's arm. "Come," he said. "We need to move before it surrounds us." Nathaniel swallowed hard, his fingers brushing the edges of the scorched ledger on the floor. Smoke curled faintly upward, the acrid scent filling his nostrils. The letters and numbers on the pages seemed to twist in the heat, making his vision swim. They moved swiftly down a narrow aisle, the eyes above following silently. Nathaniel's boots slipped on scattered dust and debris. Somewhere in the shadows, the whispering began again, soft, insistent, almost pleading. Leave, or join them. The visitor halted at the end of the aisle and pulled a thin, leather-bound book from a hidden compartment in the shelf. Its edges were frayed, and the smell of old paper and wet earth mixed sharply with the lingering scent of smoke. He opened it carefully, revealing a hand-drawn map of Hollow Creek and the surrounding Ozark Mountains. Nathaniel leaned closer. The map depicted roads, streams, and forests, but something about it felt wrong. Several paths were crossed out, scribbled over with dark ink. Some roads simply vanished into blank spaces, labeled only with a symbol. The Crooked Tree. The survivor used this map, the visitor explained quietly. It shows the town before the fire, and the places he wanted to hide. Nathaniel traced a finger along the winding paths. So this is where Hollow Creek still exists? He asked, disbelief and dread mingling in his voice. The visitor shook his head. Not quite. The town is gone, but its echoes remain. The roads lead to ruins, to hidden passages, to places where the fire didn't touch, and where the last witness may still walk. A gust of cold air swept through the aisle, carrying a sharper metallic scent. Nathaniel shivered. He could almost feel the town pressing against him through the map, as though the paper itself were alive. Then he noticed something else, scribbled faintly in the corner of the map, almost imperceptible. Beware the eyes that follow. His stomach clenched. He glanced at the darkened aisles around them. Hundreds of glowing eyes still watched from the shelves, unblinking and unyielding. The visitor snapped the book closed and stuffed it into his coat. We don't have much time. Once they realize you've seen this, Hollow Creek will send more than whispers. Nathaniel's mind raced. The ledger, the photograph, the map. Every clue led to one inevitable truth. The survivor wasn't just hiding. He was waiting. Waiting for someone to find the story, to understand the fire, to confront the man who had outlasted the town itself. A sudden crash echoed from the back of the archive. Dust rained from the high shelves. The eyes in the shadows seemed to flare, bright and frantic. Nathaniel's pulse surged. The visitor pulled him along. We must leave, he said. Every second we linger, the town tests you. The survivor knows we are here. Nathaniel's feet stumbled over scattered ledgers. He could taste the smoke, the iron, the fear itself burning at the back of his throat. Somewhere in the maze of shadows, the whispering returned. He knows. He's coming. Nathaniel glanced at the visitor. Coming? Who? The visitor's eyes were grim, darkened with a knowledge Nathaniel didn't yet possess. The man in the photograph, he said slowly. The last living witness of Hollow Creek, and he does not forgive intruders. A sudden sound, soft, deliberate, almost like bee, breathing, echoed behind them. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, pressing closer with every heartbeat. Nathaniel's stomach twisted. He could no longer deny the truth. Chapter 11. The Ruins Beyond the Fog. Nathaniel Carter's boots sank into the mud as he and the visitor emerged from the edge of the Ozark forest. Rain had finally eased into a mist, the grey fog curling between the skeletal trees like wandering spirits. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly of ash. Each breath carried the metallic tang Nathaniel had grown to associate with Hollow Creek. The visitor led the way, a lantern swinging lightly in one hand. Its flickering flame cast long, trembling shadows over the ruins that lay before them. Broken timber and charred stone jutted from the ground. Roofs had collapsed into themselves. The remains of chimneys leaned at impossible angles, and the smell of old smoke still clung to the cracked earth. Nathaniel's eyes roamed the scene. He could almost hear the town alive, faint echoes of laughter, the patter of small feet, the creak of doors long gone. Every step he took stirred the damp leaves, the faint whisper of movement brushing against his ears like ghostly voices. The visitor paused at the center of the ruins. "Here," he said quietly. "This is where the photograph was taken." Nathaniel knelt to examine the ground. The dirt was soft, churned, as if someone, or something, had recently passed through. Charred wood lay scattered, giving off a bitter, acrid smell. He could still taste smoke on the air, even hours after the fire had supposedly claimed the town. "Look carefully," the visitor said, pointing to a faint indentation near the old church ruins. Nathaniel bent closer and saw it. Footprints. Long, narrow, deep in the mud, exactly like the ones he had found in the archive. "They're here," he whispered. "Someone's still here." The visitor nodded. "The survivor doesn't like being followed, but he leaves signs, a trail for those bold, or foolish, enough to seek him." Nathaniel felt his pulse spike. "And the others?" The visitor shook his head. "Gone, or worse. Hollow Creek doesn't release the dead lightly." A sudden wind gusted through the ruins, carrying with it a faint whisper, low and insistent. "Leave, before it's too late." Nathaniel shivered. The words seemed to come from the very earth itself, or perhaps from the shadows between the collapsed walls. Every nerve in his body screamed danger. He followed the footprints cautiously, the mud sucking at his shoes, the damp smell thick in his nostrils. Every step seemed to carry him deeper into the secrets of the town, into the heart of a story no one had dared uncover for more than a century. Ahead, a faint light glimmered through the fog. Nathaniel's chest tightened. The figure of a man appeared near the remnants of the church doorway. He was tall, his coat dark and dripping, the crooked tree symbol carved faintly into the ruins behind him. The mist curled around him like smoke from a fire long dead. Nathaniel froze. His skin prickled. The visitor leaned close. "That's him," he whispered. "The survivor. The one who has watched over Hollow Creek since it burned." The man in the doorway raised his head, and for the first time, Nathaniel could see his eyes, sharp, dark, and unblinking. A faint, sinister smile curved his lips. Nathaniel's breath caught. The mist seemed to swirl around the survivor, carrying whispers and echoes from the past. And then, slowly, the man stepped forward. Toward Nathaniel. The sound of wet mud squelching under his boots echoed like thunder. Nathaniel's heart froze, because in that moment he understood one terrible truth. Hollow Creek's secret was not just history. It was alive, and it was coming for him. Chapter 12. The survivor's warning. Nathaniel Carter stood rooted in the fog, every nerve screaming. The man in the church doorway, tall, silent, unblinking, stepped closer, each footfall sinking into the mud with a wet, sucking sound. The crooked tree symbol carved behind him seemed to pulse faintly in the mist, a silent herald of what had survived Hollow Creek's fire. The visitor whispered sharply in Nathaniel's ear, "Do not speak unless he allows it. The survivor tests intentions." Nathaniel swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, the acrid scent of ash still lingering in the air, biting at the back of his tongue. He could almost taste the smoke from that night over a century ago, as if the ruins themselves exhaled it. The survivor's eyes locked onto Nathaniel. There was no warmth, no friendliness, only a sharp, calculating intelligence. His gaze seemed to pierce through time itself, brushing aside the present and exposing the echoes of Hollow Creek. Finally, the man spoke. His voice was calm, but carried an edge like a whip. "You have come because you wanted answers," he said. "Curiosity brought you here, but curiosity is dangerous in a place like this." Nathaniel's voice trembled. I need to know what happened. Why did the town disappear? Why did everyone vanish?" The survivor's lips curved faintly. "You are braver than most, or perhaps foolish. Very well. Listen carefully, and do not interrupt." He paused, letting the words hang in the mist. Hollow Creek was cursed. Long before the fire, something dark fell over this place. The people. They were claimed one by one. The fire was only a beginning, a cleansing for those who could not leave. I survived because I bore the mark. Nathaniel's eyes widened. The mark. The survivor lifted a gloved hand, pointing to a faint scar running along his palm, curling up his wrist. Nathaniel could feel the weight of that single detail. It was the same symbol from the letter, the photograph, the crooked tree emblem. "The mark," the survivor continued, "protects me, keeps me alive, but it also binds me. Hollow Creek does not forget. It waits, it watches, and it punishes those who pry too deeply." Nathaniel shivered as he felt a cold gust pass through the ruins, carrying faint whispers that seemed to rise from the mud itself. "Curse! Leave! Join us!" He looked at the visitor. Then the ledger, the names. They're not just records. They're warnings. The survivor's eyes darkened. Yes, every name on that ledger was claimed, every soul accounted for, except for those few who carried the mark. And now, one of you has touched it. You are tied to Hollow Creek's story, whether you wish to be or not. Nathaniel swallowed hard. The metallic taste of fear coated his tongue. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down, of secrets buried in fire and shadow. The ruins around him groaned faintly in the mist, as though the town itself were alive, listening. The survivor took a slow step closer, and Nathaniel could feel the oppressive presence of history pressing in. "You must understand," he said, voice low and unwavering. "The next choice is yours. Leave now, or follow the path that will lead you into the heart of Hollow Creek's curse." Nathaniel's mind raced. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity and a sense of destiny rooted him to the spot. The survivor paused, raising his hand slowly. "Decide wisely, because if you follow, the town will not let you leave unscathed." From the shadows of the ruins, a faint whisper rose again, mingling with the mist and the rain. "He sees you. He waits. You cannot escape." Nathaniel felt his stomach knot. His heart hammered in his chest. Because deep in the ruins, beneath the fog and the ash, he realized Hollow Creek's secret was far darker, and far closer than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 13. Into the Heart of Hollow Creek. Nathaniel Carter tightened his grip on the visitor's arm as they stepped deeper into the ruins. The fog hung thick, curling around broken timbers and charred stone like living smoke. Every step squelched in the mud, leaving footprints that would vanish almost immediately, swallowed by the earth and mist. The survivor's warning echoed in Nathaniel's mind. The town was alive, it watched, and it punished the curious. Yet despite the fear, a part of him, the historian, the seeker of truth, pushed him forward. Ahead, through a tangle of ruined streets, they reached a small clearing. Trees leaned inward, their branches like gnarled fingers forming a natural archway. Beyond it, something unnatural glimmered faintly in the mist, the remains of the Hollow Creek Church, still standing though half consumed by fire. Its doorway, crooked and charred, seemed to beckon them. Nathaniel inhaled sharply. The scent of smoke was stronger here, mingling with wet earth and decay. He could taste ash on his lips. He reached out, brushing the edge of a burnt railing. The wood was warm, almost pulsing, as if carrying the memory of the fire itself. "Stay alert," the visitor whispered. "We're entering the survivor's domain." Nathaniel's eyes darted around. Shadows clung to the edges of the church, and the faint flicker of movement teased his vision. He could hear faint whispers again, soft, disjointed, almost human, yet layered with something older and darker. As they stepped through the doorway, Nathaniel's boots echoed against the cracked floorboards. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, a mixture of smoke, dust, and the faint metallic tang of old blood. The walls bore scorch marks, but there were also strange symbols carved into the wood, crooked trees, spirals, and unfamiliar glyphs that made his skin prickle. Then he saw it. In the center of T, room, partially hidden by shadow, stood the survivor. His dark coat hung heavy, his eyes glinting in the dim light. The crooked tree symbol was carved into his palm, faintly glowing. Around him the air seemed to warp, a subtle vibration that Nathaniel could feel in his chest. "You've come far," the survivor said, his voice calm but filled with gravity. "Not many do." Nathaniel swallowed hard. "I need to know the truth. Why did the town vanish? Why were the people never found?" The survivor's lips curved slightly. "Because they were claimed by the curse. Hollow Creek is not a place for the living once the fire came. It feeds on memory, fear, and curiosity. Only those marked survive, and even then, they are bound." The visitor stepped closer to Nathaniel, whispering urgently, "Remember what he said. The survivor tests intentions. One wrong move." A sudden gust of wind rattled the church, carrying whispers louder than before. "Curse. Witness. Belong." The survivor's eyes locked on Nathaniel. "Do you understand now? The ledger you found, the photograph, every name, they are threads. Each one connects the past to the present, and you have touched the wrong thread." Nathaniel's stomach twisted as he realized the implication. By seeking the story, he had become part of it. Hollow Creek was no longer just a place in history. It was a living trap. The survivor stepped forward, the crooked tree symbol glowing brighter. "You may leave, if you wish," he said slowly. "But know this. Once you step into the heart of Hollow Creek, the town decides your fate." Nathaniel froze. The whispers rose, swirling around him, carrying voices of the long-vanished townspeople. The mist thickened. The room seemed to pulse with unseen energy. A sudden movement caught his eye, something dark slipping along the edges of the church, watching, waiting. And then, a soft, chilling voice whispered directly in his ear, "You cannot leave. You belong to Hollow Creek now." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. Chapter 14. The Choice of Shadows. Nathaniel Carter's breath came in shallow gasps as the survivor's words sank in. The church seemed alive, every shadow stretching and twisting as if aware of his presence. The air smelled of wet ash and iron, and the metallic tang coated his tongue, bitter and unyielding. The visitor tightened his grip on Nathaniel's arm. "Remember," he whispered, "Hollow Creek reacts to intention. Choose wisely." Nathaniel glanced around. The shadows of the ruined town seemed to pulse with movement. Faint whispers rose from the walls and floorboards, voices that were almost human, almost pleading. Follow or perish. The survivor stood perfectly still, the crooked tree symbol on his palm glowing softly. His eyes were dark, sharp, unblinking. He did not raise a hand, but the air itself seemed to bend toward him. Nathaniel felt pressure in his chest, a subtle but undeniable pull, as though the very town were calling him forward. "Why me?" Nathaniel whispered, his voice trembling. "Why choose me to see this?" The survivor's gaze swept over him. "Because curiosity is both a gift and a curse. Those who seek the truth awaken it." He lifted a hand slowly, pointing toward a narrow passage behind the altar. "Beyond there lies what remains of the town's heart. Enter, and you will see the fire, the faces, and the truth of who survived. Refuse, and Hollow Creek will forget you, erase you, but at a cost. The town does not forgive half measures. Nathaniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel the mist curling around his ankles, smelling of earth, ash, and smoke. The whispers grew louder, overlapping. He waits. Witness. Obey. He glanced at the visitor. What happens if I go in? The man's expression was grim. You may understand, or you may be consumed. There's no return once you touch the heart of Hollow Creek. Nathaniel's mind raced. He remembered the photograph, the ledger, the map. Every clue had led him here. Every warning had been ignored by his own curiosity. And yet the survivor's presence carried both threat and invitation. A cold wind swept through the church, carrying a faint metallic scent that made Nathaniel's tongue tingle. He could almost feel invisible eyes watching from the corners, from the shelves of ruined homes, from the spaces between collapsed timbers outside. The survivor stepped aside, motioning toward the narrow passage. Shadows pooled there, thick and writhing. From deep within, a soft, ghostly glow beckoned. Faint whispers tickled Nathaniel's ears, urging him forward, weaving a melody of curiosity and dread. Nathaniel's hand hovered over the ledger he still carried. The pages crackled faintly under his fingers, as if aware of his hesitation. He swallowed. His pulse thundered. The survivor's gaze did not waver. Finally, Nathaniel whispered to himself, I have to know. The mist curled around him as he stepped toward the narrow passage. Each step sank slightly into the damp earth. The air thickened with smoke and whispers. The metallic tang sharpened, almost like fear, made tangible. Behind him, the visitor watched silently. The survivor remained still, palm raised slightly, the crooked tree symbol glowing. Nathaniel's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But he could not. And then, from the shadows ahead, a distorted, faintly human voice rose, half warning, half promise. So you come to join Hollow Creek. A sudden gust slammed the passage doors shut behind him. The mist swirled, blinding him, and Nathaniel realized he was completely alone. Chapter 15. The heart of Hollow Creek. Nathaniel Carter stumbled forward through the narrow passage, the mist clinging to him like a living thing. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, sharper, burning at the back of his throat. Every breath carried the taste of ash, earth, and something older, something darker. The narrow walls pressed close, shadows twisting unnaturally around him. Faint whispers curled from the mist, voices overlapping, some human, some distorted. He sees you. He waits. Witness. Obey. Nathaniel clutched the ledger to his chest. Its pages crackled faintly, as if alive, warning him, urging him onward. He could almost feel the heartbeat of Hollow Creek beneath his feet, the rhythm of the fire, the pulse of the town's long-dead souls. Ahead, a soft glow appeared. Pale at first, then stronger, revealing a courtyard swallowed by ruins. Burnt houses leaned precariously, cobblestones cracked and slick with rainwater, and the remnants of the church doorway, the same one from the photograph, stood like a skeleton at the center. The crooked tree symbol carved into the lintel pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat of its own. Nathaniel stepped into the courtyard. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Shadows shifted along the ruins, watching, waiting. Then he saw him, the survivor. He stood in the center, coat heavy and damp, eyes dark, unblinking. The crooked tree symbol glowed on his palm. Around him, faint shapes hovered, the echoes of Hollow Creek's vanished townspeople, their forms blurred and translucent, faces faceless, yet somehow full of intent. You have come, the survivor said, voice low but resonant, carrying across the courtyard. Curiosity brought you here. Knowledge will either save you or claim you. Nathaniel's legs trembled. I need to understand. What happened? Why did Hollow Creek vanish? The survivor's gaze swept over the courtyard, encompassing the ruins, the mist, and the hovering echoes. The town was cursed long before the fire. Its people were claimed by something older than memory. The fire. It was only a catalyst. Those who vanished did not die. They were absorbed into the town's essence. Only those marked survive, bound to witness, to remember. Nathaniel's stomach twisted. He could hear the faintest footsteps echoing behind him, though no one was there. The mist swirled with a whispering chorus. Witness, obey, belong. The survivor stepped closer. You are now part of Hollow Creek's story. Every clue you have found, every name you have read, they lead to this moment. And now you must decide. Will you bear the knowledge and survive, or retreat and let the town erase you from memory? Nathaniel's hands shook. Every instinct screamed to run, but the ledger, the photograph, the map, they all demanded he continue. He swallowed, the acrid taste of smoke burning his throat. I will see it through, he said.